Then a voice from the shadows said, "That's all you had to say." And Biscuit exploded. Not literally, though several pixies considered that a reasonable concern. This is Chapter 14 of Those Damn Brownies. If you try, sometimes you get hope. This is also our Season 2 finale, and if you want to start from the beginning and follow the whole adventure with Snooker, Weewee, Biscuit, Daz, and Pooky, begin with Chapter 1. You'll find the Chapter 1 link and the Season 2 hub in the show notes. And if you know someone who loves cozy fantasy with bite, displaced magical creatures with clipboards, Dachshund-led investigations, fairy tale family wounds, sibling reunions, and soup as restorative justice, send this episode their way. Previously, on Those Damn Brownies, Daz, Pooky, Biscuit, Snooker, and Weewee crossed into the magical realm in search of hope, only to discover that every answer came wrapped in a story, a snack, a warning, or a door that opened somewhere worse. At Bubby Bama's house, the night market, Yontif's cave, and the castle itself, they began remembering what Snuffleglump had stolen. Family, history, grief, and the truth of who they once were. They learned the court had been made to forget them, that the kingdom had been forced to live inside a lie, and that memory could return for a moment when Daz and Pooky stood together, but only for a moment. And now, with hope still missing, the road away from the castle leads toward the forest, and toward the folk who remember differently. Chapter 14. If you try, sometimes you get hope. By Glory Fink. Daz and Pooky had gone to the castle hoping for a door. They found a wound instead. The palace road stretched away from the gates in a long pale ribbon, sun faded and cracked in the places where old processions had once rolled grandly toward celebration. Moss had grown thick in the grooves where carriage wheels had cut the stone. Weeds with tiny purple flowers nodded between the cobbles. The castle behind them stood large and beautiful and deeply unhelpful, as most institutions do when they had forgotten their own crimes. Daz walked with one hand resting against Biscuit's leash, and the other pressed lightly to the place where memory had become a bruise inside her chest. Pooky walked beside her, his face still and watchful. Shadows had collected near his boots, not dramatically, not enough to frighten anyone who did not already know what to look for, but enough that the road beneath him seemed less certain about having ever been bright. Biscuit kept looking back over her shoulder at the castle. She did not bark. This was more ominous than barking. A dog who barked had delivered her opinion, and was willing to move on with the rest of the day. A dog who kept looking backward without barking had formed a legal position, and was waiting for the correct moment to file it with her teeth. Snooker and Weewee sat in their usual traveling places, Snooker in Pooky's shirt pocket and Weewee in Daz's. Both brownies had been quiet for so long that Daz began to worry one or both of them might be ill. "Are we any closer?" Pooky asked at last. Daz did not pretend not to understand. They had remembered the king and queen. They had remembered the court. They had remembered enough of the truth to know that Snuffleglump had not merely stolen a throne. He had stolen a story and forced the kingdom to live inside his lie. They had remembered that they had once been prince and princess. They had remembered being loved. They had remembered being lost. But hope was still missing. Daz took a breath. The air tasted like old stone, dust, and distant rain. "I don't know," she said. "I think we know more, but knowing more is not the same as being closer." Pooky's jaw tightened. Biscuit paused in the road and sniffed hard at a patch of grass beside the stones. Her little red body went very still, and then she sneezed 3 times in a row and looked personally offended. "Is that hopeful, my sunshine?" Daz asked. Biscuit huffed. "Hope's trail?" Pooky asked. Daz watched Biscuit lower her nose again. The dachshund sniffed in a careful circle, stepped forward, stepped back, turned around twice, and finally sat down with the weary dignity of a professional surrounded by amateurs. "I think it's here," Daz said, "but tangled, old, crossed over with too many other magics." "Aye," Weewee said softly from Daz's pocket. "That happens here." Snooker cleared his throat. It was a very small sound, but it carried the weight of someone about to make a suggestion he had been saving for the point at which everyone else had exhausted the reasonable options. "My lord and lady!" Pooky glanced down at his pocket. Yes, Snooker?
If it pleases your majesties, perhaps the next place to seek answers is not a castle.
Daz looked up. Snooker straightened, which was a considerable feat while standing in a pocket.
The castle has told what castles can tell, which is to say, records, gaps, excuses, and the shape of what power did to those too near it.
Weewee nodded.
And dust! A great deal of dust!
But there are other folk who remember things differently, Snooker continued.
Not clearly, perhaps. Not completely, but differently.
Daz's brows drew together. Who? Snooker looked at Weewee, and Weewee looked at Snooker. Then both brownies looked toward the forest beyond the road.
Our people,
Weewee said. The road bent away from the castle and toward the deep green of the old forest. It did not look particularly welcoming. It looked like a place that had seen every sort of traveler and had formed opinions about all of them. Daz followed the line of the trees with her eyes. You want to go home? She said. Snooker clasped his hands behind his back.
Want is perhaps too cheerful of a word. It is home, Weewee said, but it is not what home ought to be.
Pooky's voice softened. What happened there? The brownies exchanged another glance. This glance contained no mischief. It contained memory, grief, and the particular shame of small people who had not been able to stop large cruelties from marching all over them.
When Stuffleglump took power, Snooker said, the first thing he did was make sure everyone understood who would be blamed for everything.
The magical folk? Daz said.
Aye,
Weewee replied.
For bad harvests, sour milk, lost spoons, sickly sheep, thunderstorms with poor timing, babies crying during royal decrees, courtiers forgetting their manners, weather being disobedient, bridges not respecting carts, mushrooms growing where mushrooms wish to grow. Any political embarrassment whatsoever, Snooker added, was generally traced back to treasonous enchantment by suspicious persons of unusual height, shape, appetite, plumage, horn, scale, wing, root, or tail.
Pooky's mouth flattened. Convenient.
Very, said Snooker. The most convenient lies are generally the ones with soldiers attached.
Daz walked a little slower. The forest ahead seemed to lean closer. Did they hunt you? She asked.
They hunted many, Snooker replied. Some were killed, some were taxed into ruin, some were accused, some were invited to prove loyalty by surrendering their homes, their names, their tools, their songs, or their young.
Daz's hand tightened around Biscuit's leash. And the rest fled? Pooky said.
Aye, Weewee answered. To the forest!
They continued down the road. As they walked, Snooker and Weewee explained the problem with refuges, which is that being less murderous than the place one has fled does not automatically make a place comfortable, organized, or sane. The deep forest had been a home for some, a tolerable home for others, a temporary hiding place for many, but had not been built for everyone at once.
It is one thing, Snooker said, for 3 bog sprites to occupy a damp glade and file seasonal complaints about frog course irregularities. It is another thing entirely, Weewee said, when the bog sprites are sharing that damp glade with 2 griffin families, a retired troll, 7 mushroom shepherds, an owlbear registrar, and a unicorn who believes mist belongs exclusively to her bloodline.
Unicorns own mist? Daz asked.
No,
said Snooker.
Yes,
said Weewee at the same time.
Snooker sighed. No in law, yes in attitude.
Pooky's mouth twitched. And the owlbear registrar? He asked. Weewee groaned.
Clipboard!
Several clipboards, Snooker said with the solemnity usually reserved for battlefield losses. Why? Daz asked.
No one knows. The owlbear says civilization begins with documentation,
Weewee said darkly. They walked on. The forest rose before them, old and vast and crowded with shadows. Every branch seemed to hold a whisper. Every leaf seemed to know more than it intended to say. Biscuit lifted her nose and inhaled so deeply that her whole body expanded. Then her tail began to wag. Not her happy sausage wag, not her polite greeting wag, This was a working wag. The scent trail had changed. Daz looked down. Do you have something, my darling? Biscuit did not look back this time. She stepped off the road and led them toward the trees. The moment they crossed beneath the first arch of branches, the air became greener. Not fresher exactly, more inhabited. The forest did not feel empty in the way human forests sometimes pretended to be empty, while secretly containing raccoons, snakes, ticks, and opinions. This forest felt obviously full to overflowing. A kettle whistled somewhere high above them. Something shouted, "This is my ladle, Brindletoes, and I will see you before the council about this." Something larger shouted back, "It was a common use stew zone." A flutter of blue-winged pixies shot across the path, each carrying what appeared to be a stolen thimble. They were pursued by an enraged hedgehog wearing spectacles.
"Official business!"
squeaked one pixie.
"Organized crime!"
shouted the hedgehog. Daz stopped. Pooky stopped. Biscuit did not stop. Biscuit had long ago learned that the world was ridiculous and that important smells rarely waited for a person to fully process this information. Snooker cleared his throat.
"Welcome," he said. "It is to our home."
A squirrel wearing a waistcoat leapt from one branch to another overhead and yelled,
"If you have not registered your shadow by noon, it will be counted as communal shade."
Pooky looked up slowly. "My shadows are not communal," he said in a low, quiet, thunderous tone. The squirrel froze. The branch froze. The air around the squirrel froze. And then the squirrel bowed so fast he nearly fell off the tree.
"Oh, of course, your lordship. Personal shadow, private shadow, protected shadow, very fine shadow, no forms necessary."
Pooky looked at Daz, and Daz looked at Pooky. Weewee whispered from Daz's pocket,
"Oh, they know something."
The forest became more crowded the deeper they went. Hammocks had been strung between ancient trees at 17 different heights, most of which seemed badly chosen. Small doors had been carved into roots, under roots, above roots, and in at least one case, through a root that had not consented. Kettle smoke rose from mushroom caps. Laundry lines fluttered with socks, ribbons, feathers, tiny trousers, and one extremely long scarf that had become a territorial dispute between 3 aunties and a moth. Brownies lived in clustered apartments tucked between tree roots, with balconies made from bark and acorn caps. Pixies had painted arrows on stones, then moved the stones, then painted complaint symbols on the backs of anyone who objected. Bog sprites had set up a desk beside a puddle and were taking statements from frogs. 2 griffins glared at each other from neighboring branches.
"My great-grandfather nested here during the Age of Thunder,"
said one.
"My great-grandmother ate your great-grandfather during the Age of Thunder,"
said the other.
"That is unverified family propaganda."
"That is oral history."
"It is slander."
"It was dinner."
Near a mossy clearing, 2 unicorns stood in a triangle polishing their horns while carefully not making eye contact with anyone less glossy than themselves. One unicorn sniffed as Daz passed.
"She breathes mortal,"
the unicorn said. Another unicorn tilted her head.
"No, it's a glamour."
The third looked at Pooky and took a cautious step behind the other 2. The first unicorn sniffed again less confidently.
"Well, she breathes near mortals."
"She has manners and working ears, which you clearly do not," said Daz. The unicorn's ears flattened. Pooky coughed into his hand to hide a laugh. Biscuit, who understood neither unicorn politics nor the spiritual burden of glossiness, walked directly toward the first unicorn's foreleg and sniffed it. The unicorn gasped. Biscuit looked up. The unicorn looked down. There are moments in every creature's life when it must decide whether it believes in hierarchy. The unicorn, confronted by a determined dachshund who smelled faintly of sausage, magic, and perfect confidence, chose not to test the matter.
"Charming hound,"
the unicorn said stiffly. Biscuit sneezed on her hoof. Weewee clapped both hands over their mouth. Snooker murmured,
Diplomacy is a many splendid thing, is it not?
At last they reached a broad clearing ringed with old trees. It might once have been beautiful in a peaceful way. Now it was beautiful in the way a kitchen is beautiful after 6 families have cooked in it during a storm. Crowded, fragrant, chaotic, held together by determination, love, chaos, and somebody's willingness to keep stirring the pot. In the center stood an owlbear, wearing a sash with brass buttons and carrying 3 clipboards. Snooker stiffened.
Oh no!
Weewee whispered. The owlbear turned. She was enormous. She had the body of a bear, the head of an owl, if a bear had designed the owl's head, and the expression of a church secretary who had found out someone was using the fellowship hall without filling out the correct reservation form.
Snooker, son of Knacker, she said.
Snooker swallowed.
Registrar Beakmuddle.
Weewee, child of ill-advised errands. Weewee raised a hand and softly said,
Hello.
You have returned with a filing notice of mission completion, mission failure, mission postponement, mission redirection, mission meal expense, or mission associated emotional damages.
It was a secret mission, and the mission is ongoing,
Weewee said. The owlbear blinked slowly. There is a form for that. Of course there is, Pooky muttered. The owlbear's round golden eyes moved from the Brownies to Daz, then to Pooky. The clearing changed. It was subtle at first. A hush moved through the creatures nearest them, then through the creatures beyond, then up the trees, across the root balconies, under the mushroom awnings, into the puddles where the bog sprites had been taking complaints. One by one, faces turned. An old brownie dropped a wooden spoon. A griffin lifted his head and squinted. A unicorn stopped polishing her horn to become very still, as if this would protect her. The owlbear lowered her active clipboard.
That one shines bright,
someone whispered.
That one carries the old dark,
whispered someone else.
Court folk?
No.
Older.
Royal?
Maybe before royal.
I thought they were dead. I thought everyone was dead. Daz's throat tightened, and Pooky stood very still. Biscuit planted all 4 tiny feet in the front of them and surveyed the clearing as if daring anyone to make this reunion unpleasant. Snooker climbed carefully out of Pooky's pocket and onto his shoulder. Weewee did the same from Daz's pocket.
Good folks,
Snooker called, and his voice carried farther than seemed possible for a creature 9 inches tall.
We have returned.
A murmur passed through the forest.
With guests,
Weewee added. Snooker nodded, accepting the correction.
With guests.
The owlbear took one cautious step forward. And these? Daz looked at her. We are looking for our sister. The silence became sharper. A brownie grandmother near the edge of the clearing pressed one hand to her mouth.
3, she whispered. There were 3.
Pooky turned toward her. What do you remember? The old brownie's eyes filled with tears.
Bells. I remember bells. The castle bells rang for 3 days when the children came home. There were honey cakes in the market and lanterns in the river. The queen wore blue. The king carried one of you, I don't know which, like he was afraid the whole world might try to snatch you back.
Daz's eyes stung. Another voice spoke from high in a branch, a griffin, old enough that the feathers around his beak had grown pale.
I remember the edict changing. One year there were royal children, beloved children, gifted children, strange children, some said, but blessed. Then, only a few years later, there had never been any children at all.
Pixie hovering near the griffin's shoulder.
I remember a song.
Which song? Pooky asked. The pixie's little face tightened with effort.
I don't know. Only that it had their names in it, or almost their names, or the names folk used when true names were too dangerous to utter in public.
Daz took a shaky breath. What happened to Hope? She asked. The creatures looked at one another. No one answered, not because they did not want to, because they could not. The old brownie grandmother shook her head.
We remember the vanishing. We remember the fear. And the goblin soldiers. We remember folk who asked too loudly began disappearing by morning. But the little princess...
She was not little, said a troll from the edge of the clearing. Everyone turned. The troll was seated beside a bridge that crossed nothing. He was the color of damp stone and old bark, and moss grew over one shoulder like a shawl. His bridge arched grandly from one patch of moss to another patch of moss, spanning no water, ditch, ravine, or inconvenience whatsoever. I saw her once, he said, not close from the road. She looked small because children look small, but she was not little. Daz went still. What did she look like? The troll thought for so long that two pixies began braiding a daisy chain in his beard. At last he said, like tomorrow had learned to waltz. Pooky closed his eyes, and Daz pressed her lips together. Weewee sniffed loudly. Snooker took out a tiny handkerchief and handed it to them. The owlbear registrar looked from Daz to Pooky to the clearing full of watching folk and seemed, for the first time, unable to locate the correct form. Snooker cleared his throat.
My lord, my lady, this is why we went looking for the Djinn.
Pooky opened his eyes. Daz looked down at him. The Djinn?
Aye, Weewee said. Not a warrior, not a prince, not a prophecy. We had tried speaking to committees.
Several creatures groaned.
We had tried speaking to councils,
Snooker said, more groaning.
We had tried shared chore rosters,
Weewee added. A unicorn said, those were unfairly structured. A bog sprite shouted,
you failed to submit wetland impact documentation.
The point, Snooker said loudly, is that we were desperate. The forest quieted again. Snooker stood taller on Pooky's shoulder.
When home becomes a place where the smallest folks sleep nearest the drafts, eat last from the pot, and are sent first into danger because we are easy to overlook, then one begins to wonder whether survival is enough.
Weewee's voice was smaller when they said, it isn't.
Snooker nodded. So we went looking for someone who was said to help when no one else could.
The Djinn? Daz said.
The Djinn,
said Snooker. Every creature in the clearing seemed to have a reaction to that word. Wings shifted, hooves tapped, tails curled, whiskers twitched. The owlbear made a note on one clipboard, then seemed embarrassed and tucked it under her arm. Pooky looked around. You all know of this Djinn?
No,
said the old griffin.
Yes,
said a pixie.
Not personally,
said a unicorn.
She owes me a spoon,
said a brownie.
She gave me the spoon,
said another brownie.
It was my spoon first. It was in a common use soup space.
The owlbear lifted a clipboard.
We are not reopening the spoon case at this time.
Daz rubbed her forehead. Snooker raised both hands.
The Djinn is known, he said, but not findable in any reliable fashion.
She grants wishes? Pooky asked.
No, said Weewee. That is what makes her peculiar. She grants needs, Snooker said.
The words moved through the clearing like a small wind.
People who asked for gold, said the old brownie grandmother, received bread, boots, or the courage to leave a bad marriage.
A cousin of mine asked for revenge, said the griffin, and came back with a broom, 2 witnesses, and a legal strategy.
A very humiliating story, the unicorn said. Claims she healed a crack in my horn.
Did she? Daz asked. The unicorn lifted her chin.
It was mostly cosmetic.
A pixie fluttered upside down.
She gave me silence for a whole day.
That sounds relaxing, Daz said.
It was horrible, the pixie replied. Also transformational. I hated it.
The troll beside the bridge spoke without opening his eyes. I asked for a kingdom. And? Pooky asked. The troll patted the bridge fondly. She gave me a bridge.
That crosses nothing,
said Weewee. It crosses over distress. No one argued. This may have been because the statement was wise, or because no one wished to spend the afternoon discussing troll philosophy. Daz looked at Snooker and Weewee. Tell us how you found her. Snooker's expression changed. There was the storyteller again. the little creature who could gather a room, a table, a house, or a herding forest into his arms and say, "Listen, this matters." He stepped from Pooky's shoulder onto a low branch that bent obligingly nearer. Weewee climbed down Daz's sleeve and stood beside him.
"It was during the 3rd week of rain," Snooker began, "when all the blankets smelled of mildew, and all the children were cranky, all the elders were crankier, and someone had eaten the last of the blackberry preserves and replaced the jar on the pantry shelf, as if civilization itself has no meaning."
A collective hiss of outrage passed through the Brownies.
"Dark times," said Weewee. "We had heard tales," Snooker continued, "a Djinn who appeared where need were most dire. A Djinn who could not be summoned by greed, trapped by flattery, or bribed with jewels, though naturally we brought jewels just in case."
"Naturally," said Pooky.
"And biscuits," said Weewee, "for the journey." "They did not survive the journey," Snooker admitted. "They were journey biscuits," Weewee said, and patted their tummy in remembrance. "They fulfilled their purpose."
Snooker folded his hands.
"We followed rumor after rumor. We went first to a ruined fountain where blue glass bottles floated, though there was no water. We found only a frog who claimed to have once been an earl, which seemed unlikely given his manners." "I believed him," said Weewee. "You also believed the mushroom that, with the hat, was a retired admiral. It had authority and an air of gravitas." "We then crossed beneath a bridge where no stream had run in 100 years," Snooker continued. "There we found a door painted on the underside of the stones. The door opened only after Weewee knocked with the hilt of their butter knife and requested hospitality." "It would have been rude not to answer," Weewee said. "Beyond the door was not a room but a lane, and along the lane were lampposts with no flames, market stalls with no merchants, and trees that bore glass fruit." Daz held very still. Pooky's gaze sharpened. "And at the end," Snooker said, "sat the Djinn." Weewee's face softened. "They did not look grand," they said. "Not at first." "No jeweled crowns," Snooker said. "No thunder, no palace of smoke, no servants carrying trays of impossible gems." "She was sitting on an overturned bucket," said Weewee. "Beside a smokeless lamp," said Snooker. "Eating a biscuit," said Weewee. Snooker gave them a look. Weewee shrugged. "She was." "She looked tired," Snooker said. "And kind," said Weewee. "And sharp-eyed," said Snooker. "And amused," said Weewee, which was disconcerting because we had walked a very long way and were trying to be formal. Snooker drew himself up and clasped his hands behind his back, clearly imitating his past self. "I bowed," he said, "with all the proper respect, and said, 'Great and mysterious Djinn, we have come on behalf of the displaced folk of the deep forest who suffer from hunger, crowding, fear, poor sleeping arrangements, owlbear administration, griffin arrogance, unicorn pettiness, pixie pranks, bog sprite paperwork, troll obstruction, and insufficient jam.'" The clearing murmured. "All valid," someone said. "What did she say?" Daz asked. Weewee lifted their chin and lowered their voice into a warm, dry imitation. "She said, 'That sounds like more than 3 wishes.'" A small laugh moved through the forest. "I explained," Snooker said, "that we had no wish to be greedy. Though he did wish to be impressive," said Weewee. "I wish to be effective." "You used your court voice." "It is an effective voice, Weewee." "The Djinn asked what we wanted," Weewee said, "so we told her we wanted her to fix the forest." "And she said," Snooker continued, "I do not grant wishes." Weewee threw both hands in the air. "After all that walking!" "So I said, with commendable restraint, 'Majestic Djinn, if you do not grant wishes, there has been a severe misunderstanding in the public messaging around your services.'" Pooky snorted, and Daz smiled despite herself. "The Djinn laughed," Snooker said, "not unkindly, and then she gave us biscuits." "Excellent biscuits," Weewee said. "The sort of biscuits that restore one's faith in butter." "And then?" Daz asked. Snooker's face faded. "And then she said that the forest did not need a wish granted. It needed the world set aright." The clearing quieted. She said, Snooker went on, the only ones who can truly fix what is broken are Lady Dazzle and Lord Pooka.
Hearing their names spoken that way in the forest made Daz feel an old ache in her chest shift. Not heal, not yet, but shift, as if grief had moved enough to let breath pass. Pooky said, "Why didn't she come for us herself?" Weewee looked at him sadly.
She said you weren't ready.
Snooker nodded.
She said your memories were not merely locked. They were braced, layered, shielded, dangerous.
Daz swallowed. She knew about the enchantment?
Aye,
Weewee said.
She knew, said Snooker, and she said that if too much truth struck too quickly, any small creature standing near the remembering might not survive it.
Weewee touched the hilt of their butter knife.
We thought that meant us.
It definitely meant us, Snooker said. And still you came? Pooky said. The words were quiet. Weewee looked down at their boots. Snooker looked toward the crowded forest, the rude apartments, the tired faces, the old ones, the children, the creatures who had argued about spoons because spoons were easier to argue about than exile.
Snooker said.
Why? Daz asked. Weewee wiped their nose on their sleeve and tried to look fierce.
Because there was no home worth living in if we did not.
For a moment, no one spoke. Then Biscuit walked over to the low branch, rose carefully onto her hind legs, and gave Weewee's boot one solemn lick. Weewee made a sound that was almost a sob and almost a laugh. Pooky reached up and touched Snooker lightly with one finger, just at the shoulder. You came for us when you thought we might kill you by remembering? Snooker blinked very fast.
I did hope that there might be a few meals in it.
There were, Daz said.
Glorious meals,
Weewee said. But that wasn't why you came. Snooker looked as if he wanted to argue on behalf of his dignity and appetite. Instead, he bowed his head.
No, my lady.
Daz's face softened with such tenderness that the clearing brightened. Not dramatically, not like sunrise, more like a lamp turned up in a room where everyone had been pretending they were not afraid of the dark. You have done enough, she said. Weewee looked stricken.
But we haven't found Hope.
Biscuit's ears perked. The moment Hope's name entered the clearing, the forest reacted. Leaves shimmered though no wind blew. Roots flexed underfoot. Somewhere, a kettle stopped whistling. The unicorns lifted their heads. The griffins looked toward the deeper trees. The owlbear registrar clutched all 3 clipboards to her chest. Daz felt it too. A change. Not a sound. Not a scent exactly, though Biscuit's nose went wild. A nearness. Pooky looked into the trees. What is it? No one answered. Then every creature began talking at once.
I saw the Djinn last spring.
No, last winter.
She repaired the dam.
She ruined my revenge.
She saved my cousin's egg.
She evaluated my bridge.
She gave me soup. She gave me silence.
She gave me a nap and I didn't like it one bit.
She told me to apologize to my daughter.
She turned my complaint into a tort. She said my destiny was hydration.
Daz lifted both hands. Wait, please. Does anyone know where she is? Silence. Then all at once.
No, not as such. Define no. I have theories. I have a map. The map is emotionally attuned.
The owlbear has a form.
I have 7 forms, said the owlbear. Pooky rubbed both hands over his face. Of course, he said. They began searching anyway. The owlbear registrar insisted all inquiries about Djinn sightings begin at the complaint desk, where a bog sprite demanded a complete description of the desired Djinn, the emotional context of the inquiry, whether any food had been involved, and whether the petitioner intended to request gold, revenge, power, a pony, a constitutional monarchy, or other. Daz wrote sister under other. The bog sprite looked at the paper, then at Daz, and quietly stamped it with a stamp that said urgent in dripping green letters. From the complaint desk, they were sent to a griffin auntie who claimed that Djinn had saved her cousin's egg during the year of falling branches, though she insisted the egg had never needed saving and was merely briefly overcommitted to gravity. The griffin auntie sent them to the unicorn pasture, where the unicorn with the alleged cosmetic horn injury described the Djinn as impertinent, effective, and badly dressed in a way that suggested moral wisdom. The unicorn sent them to a troll bridge. The troll bridge, unfortunately, was the same bridge that crossed nothing. The troll opened one eye as they approached.
"You are looking too hard,"
he said. "That is because we are looking for someone," Pooky replied.
"Most looking is for someone."
"We are looking for our sister." The troll opened the other eye.
"That is the worst kind."
"Do you know where the Djinn is?" Daz asked.
"No."
Daz sighed.
"But she knows where she is,"
said the troll. Pooky stared at him. Daz waited. The troll closed his eyes again. "That was not as helpful as you might think it was," Pooky said.
"It was exactly as helpful as it needed to be,"
said the troll. Biscuit barked once. Ruff! The troll opened one eye again.
"Your hound understands."
Biscuit did not dignify this with a reply. From the troll they were sent to a brownie pantry, where 3 aunties made Daz sit down because she looked pale and emotionally underfed. Someone gave Pooky a bowl of stew, though no one admitted to making it. Biscuit received a piece of something that had once belonged to a roast, and now belonged to her by ancient right. Snooker and Weewee were embraced, scolded, fed, inspected for injuries, scolded again for not riding, praised for bravery, accused of getting above themselves, and given a packet of oat cakes for the road, though they had not declared any intention of leaving the pantry. The brownie grandmother, who remembered the bells, sat beside Daz.
"The Djinn came here once," she said.
Daz turned toward her. "When?"
"Winter. A bad one. The sort of winter that makes folk forget kindness is infrastructure."
Daz held the warm bowl of stew in both hands. "What did she do?"
"Brought soup," said the grandmother. "Not enough to solve winter, but enough that the folk who still had turnips remembered the folk who had none. Enough that the folk with blankets remembered the folk with children. Enough that the folk with dry colors remembered the folk sleeping under roots. By morning we had a kitchen."
Daz looked around the pantry. Shelves, jars, loaves, baskets, a chopping board worn soft from years of use, tiny tables, tiny stools, a place not large enough for everyone, but somehow always making room. "She gave you soup?" Daz asked.
"No," said the grandmother. "She gave us the shame of not having already made it."
Pooky set his bowl down very carefully. Daz thought of wishes. Gold, revenge, power, answers, certainty. And then she thought of needs. Bread, witnesses, apologies, soup, courage, a bridge that crossed distress, silence for a pixie, a packet of oat cakes pressed into Weewee's hands by someone who had been angry at them 2 breaths earlier. Hope. The word moved through her like an old song remembering its tune. After the pantry, the search became absurd. They went from the brownie pantry back to the owlbear registrar, who informed them they had skipped 2 required routing steps and 1 optional but recommended orientation packet. From there, they were directed to a moth librarian who said all Djinn references were filed under unreliable assistants, mysterious benefactors, lamps, smoke, and soup, depending on the century. The moth librarian then became distracted by Pooky's sleeve and had to be escorted away from the party for everyone's safety. They were sent to the moss accountants, then to the mushroom shepherds, then to a fox who claimed he had never met the Djinn but could, for a modest fee, invent a convincing encounter. Then to a hollow stump. The hollow stump was empty, except for a note that read, "Gone to become relevant elsewhere." No signature. Daz stared at the note. Pooky stared at the stump. Biscuit sat down. The brownies looked mortified.
"I swear our home is not always like this,"
Snooker said. A pixie flew by, past carrying an entire teaspoon over her head.
"Liar!"
someone shouted after her. Snooker winced.
"Okay, it often is like this."
They ended somehow exactly where they had begun, in the broad clearing beneath the old trees, surrounded by displaced creatures, half-finished systems, simmering arguments, drying laundry, ration jam, and the weary stubbornness of folk who had not stopped living merely because someone powerful had made living difficult. Daz stood in the center of it all and felt the last of her patience go. Not in a sharp way, in a clean way. She was tired of clues. She was tired of fragments. She was tired of stories that led to doors that opened onto riddles, that led to soup, that led to forms, that led to bridges that crossed nothing. She was tired of asking where hope was, as if hope was an object mislaid under a cabinet. Hope was not a teething ring. Hope was not a baby doll. Hope was not a scent trail. Hope was not a box in an archive. Hope was her sister. Daz looked at Pooky. His face was haunted, tender, and worn through with wanting. She looked at Biscuit, whose determined little body had crossed worlds, followed impossible trails, and judged royalty as biteable when needed. She looked at Snooker and Weewee, who had walked toward ancient power with only a story, a butter knife, and the hope of being fed before they died. She looked at the forest folk, who remembered bells but not names, songs but not words, loss but not the shape of restoration. And then Daz took a breath. "Hope," she said. The clearing stilled. Daz's voice shook, but it did not break. "Hope, I wish you were here right now." Pooky reached for her hand, and Daz held it tightly and finished the truer sentence. "We need you, Hope." For one heartbeat, nothing happened. And then a voice from the shadows said, "That's all you had to say." Biscuit exploded. Not literally, though several pixies screamed as if this was a reasonable concern. The dachshund launched herself toward the trees with a bark so deep and jubilant that 3 birds abandoned their branches and 1 griffin apologized to his ancestors. "Biscuit!" Daz cried, but Biscuit had already reached the edge of the clearing. The shadows beneath an old oak stirred. Smoke blue light gathered there, not like fire and not like fog, but like evening remembering water. Gold glimmered at the edge of it, the air filled with the scent of cardamom, rain, brass, smoke, fried dough, and something so heartbreakingly familiar that Daz's knees nearly forgot their purpose. A figure stepped out. She looked like a Djinn because she had chosen to look like a Djinn. Blue smoke blue shadows wrapped her like a cloak. Gold flashed at her wrists, her throat, and the delicate curve of one ear. Her hair moved as if some private wind loved her best. Her eyes were too old for any single body and too warm to belong to any creature who had given up. But beneath the Djinn shape, beneath the smoke and gold and lamp-lit disguise, Daz saw the truth. Not all of it, not yet. Enough. Pooky made a sound like he had been struck. Daz whispered, "Hope." Hope smiled. It was not a grand smile. Not the smile of a legendary being arriving at the end of a prophecy. It was smaller than that, more dangerous, more tender. It was the smile of someone who had waited so long that joy had become almost frightening. "Hello, Daz," she said. Daz took 1 step forward. Hope's face trembled. "Hello, Pooky." Pooky crossed the clearing in 3 strides. Daz crossed it in almost the same instant, and then they were holding her. Not gracefully, not like royalty, not like ancient beings whose names were too costly to spend in public. They collided into one another with arms, sobs, hands in hair, clutching, shaking, laughing, and crying all at once. Biscuit circled them, barking because someone had to announce to the entire realm that the lost person had been located, and everyone could stop being so incompetent about it. Weewee was crying openly, and Snooker was crying discreetly, which meant he had turned around and was pretending to inspect a leaf. The owlbear registrar wiped one eye with the corner of a form. A unicorn said, "Well, that is emotionally noteworthy." "No one asked you," said the troll, but gently. Hope held Daz and Pooky as if she could gather every lost year between her hands and fold it small enough to survive. "I looked for you," Pooky said against her hair. "I know." "We couldn't find you," Daz said. "I know." We forgot you. Hope pulled back just enough to look at them both. Her eyes shone. No, she said. You survived what was done to you. That is not the same thing. Daz's face crumpled. Hope touched her cheek. Oh, my bright darling. Pooky's shadows deepened around him, not with danger, but shelter. Hope turned to him and placed her other hand against his face. And you, my dear dark heart. Pooky closed his eyes. For a moment, the forest seemed to become something else. Not less crowded, not less wounded, but larger, as if the trees had been holding their breath for years and had just remembered they were allowed to exhale. At last, Hope looked past them to Snooker and Weewee. The Brownies both straightened so quickly that Weewee nearly fell off the root they were standing on. Hope smiled. My brave ones. Snooker bowed so low his nose nearly touched the bark. Great and mysterious Djinn. Hope raised an eyebrow. Snooker amended, Your Highness? Hope raised the other eyebrow. Snooker tried again. Madam? Hope will do, she said. Weewee pointed at her with both hands. I knew there was something about you. You did not, said Snooker. I did too. You thought she might be a retired thunderstorm. She had the posture. Hope laughed. The sound moved through the clearing like warm water over cold stones. Daz did not want to stop touching her. She held Hope's hand as if afraid that if she let go, the forest would fold itself back into riddles and smoke. Why didn't you come sooner? Daz asked. Hope's smile faded, but not into coldness, into truth. Because Snuffleclump had been hunting me from the moment he failed to take me. Pooky's expression darkened. The shadows around his feet spread. Hope squeezed his hand. Not now. His jaw worked, but the shadows stilled. He needed you broken, Hope said. He needed the court emptied of you. The kingdom emptied of memory, and the magical folk emptied of power. But me, she looked toward the castle, though it was far beyond the trees. I was useful in too many ways. Bait, hostage, symbol, weapon, proof, threat. A thing to parade if he could not possess me. A thing to break if he could. Daz's hand tightened. So you hid? She asked. I hid in plain sight, Hope replied. It's one of the oldest tricks. Become something everyone wants and no one understands. Become useful but impossible to own. The Djinn, Pooky said. Hope nodded. A Djinn can appear anywhere and nowhere. A Djinn belongs to the story, but not the household. Folks seek a Djinn when they are desperate, greedy, frightened, or lost. Snuffleclump heard rumors, of course, but rumors are smoke. Every time he reached, I was elsewhere. And you helped them? Daz said, looking around at the forest. Hope's eyes softened as she took in the clearing, the root homes, the tired faces, the owlbear and her clipboards, the unicorns trying not to care, the brownies trying to look brave while crying. I could not leave them to him. The old brownie grandmother bowed her head. Hope continued, I could not fix everything. Not alone, not while hiding, not while the two of you were still sealed away from yourselves, but I could give soup, a witness, a broom, bread, silence, a bridge, a task, a question. The thing actually needed instead of the thing fear had dressed up as a wish. Pooky looked at her. You sent the brownies? I did. Weewee puffed up with pride, then seemed to remember they had also been terrified most of the time, and deflated slightly. Hope stepped toward them. Snooker and Weewee came to me asking for the forest to be fixed, she said. They were hungry, frightened, exhausted, and more courageous than was comfortable for them.
Thank you,
Weewee whispered, so I gave them what was needed.
A quest,
Snooker said. A story, Hope replied, and a warning. Daz remembered the sleep, the interrupted stories, the indirect truths, the way the brownies had circled the truth like small boats around a whirlpool. You told them not to tell us directly? I told them direct truth might destroy what was nearest to you before it healed what was inside you. Your memories were not gone, they were weight-bearing. Pull out the wrong being too quickly, and the whole house falls. Pooky looked down. Daz knew what he was thinking because she was thinking it too. Yontif's cave, the cookies, their mother. Hope's gaze moved between them. Yes, she said softly, I know. The words struck harder because they contained no accusation. Daz flinched anyway, and Hope took both her hands. You were children. We killed her, Pooky said. Hope turned to him. You were children, and children don't know better. We made the cookies. You were deceived. We listened to him. You were children, and children can easily be deceived. Mother understood that too. The third time she said it, the whole forest seemed to hear it differently. Not as an excuse, as a foundation, as the first stone in a bridge that might eventually cross guilt. Daz shook her head. I remember her hands. Hope's eyes filled. So do I. I remember thinking she was the monster. So did I for a while, Hope said. Daz stared at her. Hope's face held sorrow older than the forest. He lied to all of us in different ways. That is what he does. He takes the truth and breaks it into pieces small enough to use as blades. Pooky's voice was rough. What did he make you believe? Hope looked toward the trees. That if I came back to you too soon, I would be the reason you died. The clearing went silent, and Daz stepped closer. Hope. Hope smiled sadly. I know, lies sound different after they stop working. Biscuit pressed against Hope's ankle. Hope looked down and finally truly smiled. And you. Biscuit wagged her tail so hard her whole back end joined in. Hope crouched and held out her hand, and Biscuit sniffed it thoroughly, from fingertips to wrist to sleeve to shoe, taking in the full report for official record. Then she licked Hope's knuckles and leaned her little body against Hope's knee. She found you before we did, Daz said. Several times, Hope replied. Biscuit looked smug. You kept moving the trail, Pooky said. I kept it safe, Hope said. There is a difference. Pooky exhaled. Daz looked around the clearing. So what happens now? Every creature seemed to lean closer. The owlbear lifted a clipboard, then lowered it again. Hope stood, her Djinn form flickering at the edges. For a moment the smoke-blue shadows thinned, and something else shone through. Not light, like Daz's warmth. Not darkness, like Pooky's shelter. Something between and beyond them. The first breath before dawn. The hand reaching across a table. The stubborn green shoot under winter leaf rot. Hope. She looked at Daz and Pooky. Now, she said, I ask you the only question that matters. Pooky's eyes narrowed. Are we ready to defeat Snuffleglump? Hope shook her head. Daz, who knew her sister and did not know her at all, felt the answer before Hope spoke. No, Hope said. That is not the question. The forest waited. Hope's voice was gentle. Are you ready to forgive yourselves? Daz looked down. Pooky's shadows pulled closer around him. Hope did not rush them. Snuffleglump must be stopped, she said. The court must remember. The kingdom must learn what was stolen from us all. The magical folk must have homes safe enough to be ordinary in. The dead must be grieved truthfully. The living must be fed. The law must be remade by those who have suffered under it. Joy must be invited back carefully, with clean hands and enough chairs. The owlbear made a strangled sound at the word chairs. Hope glanced at her. Metaphorical chairs count. The owlbear nodded, relieved. Hope turned back to her siblings. But none of that can be built by punishment alone. You have enough power between you to break the world harder than he did. You have enough grief to justify almost anything, if grief were allowed to be judge, jury, and executioner. But the world does not need you to become the largest wound in it. Pooky closed his eyes. Daz whispered, Then what does it need? Hope reached for her hands. Restoration, she said. Memory, Kinship, justice, soup, boundaries, probably fewer clipboards. The owlbear inhaled sharply. Some clipboards, Hope amended. The owlbear relaxed. And joy, Hope said. Not perfect joy, not innocent joy. That is gone, and pretending otherwise would be another lie. But happier. The world can become happier than this. Daz's tears spilled over. Pooky looked at Hope with the face of someone afraid to want what was being offered. And you can help us do that? He asked. Hope smiled. I can help you do what I have been waiting for you to be ready to do all this time. Daz remembered the table in the castle, the brief returning of memory when she and Pooky placed their hands on someone together. The way memory rose, bright and trembling, and then faded again. A table cannot stand properly on two legs, she said slowly. Hope's smile widened. No, it cannot. Pooky looked between them. You're the third. I am one of many thirds, Hope said. Do not build a world on three people, Pooky. That is how everyone ends up exhausted and worshipped, which is bad for the spine and worse for the personality. Daz laughed through her tears. But yes, Hope said more softly, for the first healing, I shall stand with you. She held out one hand to Daz. She held out the other to Pooky. Daz looked at Pooky, and Pooky looked at Daz, and then they each took Hope's hands. The clearing changed. Light gathered around Daz, not blazing, not consuming, but warm as a kitchen lamp left on for someone coming home late. Shadows deepened around Pooky, not swallowing, not threatening, but cool as a covered porch at the end of a brutal summer day. Between them Hope stood, smoke blue and gold, tomorrow and memory, need and answer, the hand extended, the soup brought, the door opened, the sister found. The air trembled. Around the clearing, creatures began to remember. Not everything, not all at once. Enough. The brownie grandmother gasped and whispered the first few notes of the song she had forgotten. A pixie caught the second. A griffin rumbled the third, off-key, but proud. Somewhere in the root apartments, a child laughed at a joke no one had told in years. The owlbear registrar looked down at her forms and began to cry. At her feet, the ink rearranged itself. Not into rules, into names. Pooky's hand tightened around Hope's. Daz's light brightened. Biscuit sat at their feet like the official dachshund of restoration, chest lifted, ears alert, prepared to bark at injustice, paperwork, or anyone who attempted to interrupt this important moment without snacks. Snooker and Weewee stood on a nearby stump. Snooker's posture was dignified. Weewee's nose was running.
We did it,
Weewee whispered. Snooker took their hand.
We did not die,
he whispered back.
A fine bonus.
A glorious bonus. Hope looked out at the forest folk, then toward the distant castle hidden beyond the road, hill, and the lies. Daz followed her gaze, and Pooky did too. Far away, in the stolen palace, where curtains hung too heavy and the throne sat too cold, King Snuffleglump woke with a gasp from a dream in which 3 children stood in a forest and the whole world began saying their names. But that is a tale for the next season. For now, in the crowded forest of questionable manners, ration jam, disputed branches, clipboards, quarrels, crumbs, courage, soup, and stubborn living, 3 siblings held hands at last, and for the first time since the world had broken, Hope stood where Hope belonged, between the light that loved her and the darkness that would shelter her. The forest, which had been holding its breath for years, remembered how to exhale. Next time, on Those Damn Brownies, Hope has been found, but in the stolen palace, King Snuffleglump has felt the world begin saying names it was never supposed to remember. The forest has its first healing, the court still has its lies, and justice will have to become something larger than revenge. But the 3 ancient siblings have their work cut out for them. To set the world back aright, they must face a corrupt goblin king who can disrupt minds, steal memories, and turn truth itself into something unstable. Season 3 begins where hope finally stands, exactly where hope belongs. You've been listening to Those Damn Brownies by Glory Fink. If you'd like to help this story keep finding its people, tap the heart button. Engagement is magic. You could leave a comment. Are you team fewer clipboards, team some clipboards, or team biscuit should just run the kingdom? You can become a financial booster. Paid subs and tips directly fund writing time, audio production, and whatever fresh nonsense the fair folk approve of next. Or become a financial booster by becoming a paid subscriber to our Substack, or you can toss a few coins in our coffee fund on Ko-fi, Venmo, or Cash App. You can read Those Damn Brownies for free at Glorious Magazine and find more community goodness at Coffee Bunny Crafters Cafe. You can also find me, Glory Fink, as @Glory Writes the Blues on Blue Sky, Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, TikTok, and Threads. Until next time, keep your snacks accounted for, your shadows private, your paperwork legally mischievous, and your dachshunds snuggled. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in Chapter 15, Season 3. Goodbye!